With me, I just want to introduce a couple of my colleagues, Greg Kleiman, who's the director of our Big Data business unit, and Steve Watt, who's the architect for Red Hat's Big Data strategy. So I'll go through my marketing spiel, and all the intelligent questions will be answered by these two gentlemen right here. So I'll save you the trouble of asking me this question. But seriously, this presentation, I think it's not more than 20 minutes or so, 20, 25 minutes. We'll have enough questions as I look through the room. I think each and every one of you will have the opportunity to ask a question. So let's make full use of that.
You ask a good question, you're going to have.
Oh, that's true. So let me just take a show of hands here and then get a sense of how many of you are actually in any way, shape, or form using Red Hat's products for, oh wow, cool. So, and I don't want to belabor too much on the history behind it, but the title of this presentation today, I think it says something like 1994, it's all over again. And there's a certain truth to that, right? Because I think what we saw late 90s, early 2000s is a pronounced shift in the industry as the industry moved away from proprietary pieces of hardware and software to industry standard x86 servers with Linux running on top. And we see the same set of macro trends or macro shifts in the marketplace today when it comes to big data. So what I want to do today is kind of talk about three things. One is just an overview of where we see, we're in a great position because we get to talk to hundreds of customers on a monthly, quarterly basis to understand where they are with the big data side of things. And I'll try to sum up some of the key observations in a couple of slides. The second is to give you a sense of the product portfolio that we have today. And the third, which is the most important piece of our entire story, of our entire strategy, is the ecosystem play. Because our belief is that for customers to be successful with the journey with big data, you can't get everything from one vendor. So, and Red Hat recognizes that, and our plan here is to partner with some key vendors in the space. 6 months ago, we announced a relationship with Hortonworks. Yesterday, we announced a relationship with Cloudera. So the top two, at least the Hadoop side of things from a big data standpoint, I think we have a very compelling story to help our customers in the journey towards what they want to do with the big data side of things. So the overall theme behind this is when we look at big data, I think, what is it? I mean, pretty much over 100, I don't know how many, 800,000 projects that are open source related around big data. So the center of innovation, when we use the term big data, is all around open source. And I think our belief is that it's not just, open is more than a modifier. It truly is. It has to be the key driver for any innovation that happens in the big data space. So that's where our entire focus is, right? So if you take a step back, I think for any of these new trends for customers to capitalize on, there are three key elements. One is, what is the innovation that's going on in the community? What's the product portfolio that they have? And what's the ecosystem of partners that they can rely on to make sure it's all stitched together, right? So, oops. All right, let me just, so the next couple of slides, I just wanted to kind of highlight a few things. One is, this in a way mirrors what I would call the data life cycle in an organization 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago. How many of you agree with this? Right, which is, and fundamentally, the other difference that we are seeing is as big data continues to come more into the forefront, and I'm using Hadoop as an example, one of the key challenges when we talk to CIOs is how do they align the organization to maximize the effort they're putting into it? And they all recognize that going in with a siloed approach, where you have the data center operator, right, who's got a bunch of products, hardware and software to manage file systems, a whole new set of products to manage their big data environment. And truth be told, right, I think it's a well-published statistics that for every dollar an organization spends on hardware and software, they end up spending $6 in managing it, right? And this problem continues to kind of get worse as new technologies and new workloads start to emerge. So now the ops center guys are struggling with how do I manage all these different silos of data out there. Now the application developer on the other end of the spectrum, they are now, the old model is they had different types of application developers for different type of products, and there was nothing that weaves them together. So the end result is what we saw, and the business user, it was completely run through rogue queries and ad hoc queries to satisfy specific business needs. So the bottom line with this approach is what we saw in organizations was multiple silos with multiple views with multiple goals. And as organizations are starting to make a huge amount of investment in their big data side of things, this equation really doesn't cut it. So if you contrast that with how, and this is, I would argue to a certain extent, this is more of an utopian view of how organizations want to get there, but it's there today. Some of the leading customers that we talk to today are moving towards a model, whereas it's not a bunch of silos, but an integrated overview or integrated view of how they want to manage their new data lifecycle, right? And we think of, at Red Hat, it's not about big data, it's about old way of managing old data and the new data lifecycle. And the new data lifecycle essentially, if you look at the 4 distinct components, which is how do you ingest data from various sources? How do you integrate them together? How do you discover new ways to tap into the data that's out there to get new meaning out of this data? And last but not least, how do you act to it? I think this is a use case, a customer that I want to kind of share this with, which I won't name the customer here, but this is a large consumer products company, right? And the way they think about big data is not about Hadoop or is not about all these different tools. The way they think about big data is a classic example that this customer talked to me about was the Philippines typhoon that hit Philippines last year, right? So I think this time last year, October of last year. So Philippines brings in 40% of the world's palm oil, right? And practically every consumer goods, your hygiene products, your soap, shampoo, every one of these things uses palm oil, right? So right away, what this company did was they basically started on 3 key big data projects, pretty much using this metaphor. The first one is around using the weather maps to look at where these storms going to hit. And they very soon through this process, they went in and recognized that almost 80% of this company's palm oil is going to be affected by the storm. So what they did was they went in and bought spot market, or froze the price of palm oil, or bought it on spot market and put a call option on it so they could reduce the risk. The second thing that they did was they went in and analyzed all their internal goods, the finished goods that they sold, and they inventoried it and said, which of these products that we have today can make do with a palm oil substitute and get FDA approval within a day? And the third thing they did was they went in and did another big data analytics to go back in and say, which of my customers, my favorite customers, a Walmart, a Target, I will not affect their supply. So they went in and did this, and they survived this entire short supply of palm oil very, very easily without having to increase the cost of goods. Contrasted that with one of their competitors who was completely flat-footed, right? So this was at a forum where all these guys were talking about how they maximize the use of big data, and this was highlighted as one of the key end user experiments on how they were able to succeed with the big data. But anyway, the broader point here is that this is the way that new organizations are thinking about how to manage the new data lifecycle, which is one language, one view, one goal, which contrasted with the previous one is dramatically different. So when we talk to our customers again, right, we ask them, I would say that a majority of our customers today are still using, if I use big Hadoop as an example, it's still in early stages of development. I'd say it might be 2% of our customers today are really deploying big data at a massive scale. And I say massive, 4,000, 5,000 nodes. The rest of the customers that we talk to are either in primarily dev or test mode, starting to move to a production phase. And one of the things that they are extremely kind of wary about is openness and agility. which is this technology is moving at such a fast and furious pace, they don't want to be locked into a single stack. They want the ability to say, hey, here's a new technology that's emerging. You know, today it's Hadoop, tomorrow it's Spark. How do I really start to manage this new flurry of projects and products that are coming down the line without having to completely redo my infrastructure? Right, the other thing is, from an app developer standpoint, they want to give, or one of the biggest barriers today is it's very stringent. You know, thou shall only code to this framework, and you cannot deviate away from that. And that starts to impinge upon the ability and the creativity for these end users to really start to tap into the data. So the basic tenets of how we view big data at Red Hat, you know, I think you can read this as, I'm sure, way better than me because I'm not wearing my glasses right now, but I want to touch upon, besides the openness and the agility piece, I think one of the advantages of the agility piece, as I mentioned earlier, is the ability to integrate new technologies coming in quickly without having to forego the time to deploy some of these new apps. But more importantly, every one of our products that we have today in the marketplace is cloud ready and it's enterprise ready. So starting from the operating system, you know, we think there are 4 key pillars, right? One is physical, virtual, private cloud, and public cloud. So the ability for you to run your workload, regardless of what the underlying infrastructure, and that starts all the way from the bottom, right? Operating system, storage, infrastructure as a service, all the way up to the platform as a service. So give you the complete flexibility to say, I want to start on a public cloud, move my workload on-prem, or start on-prem, move to a public cloud if my workload continues to increase. So this is the way we think about anything that we do, and obviously cost is a huge issue, right? And we do absolutely pay, you know, given the fact that the entire product suite that we have is subscription-based, it gives you the ability to pay as you go as your organization and your loads continue to increase. All right, let me shift gears a little bit and talk about our product portfolio. And this is where I want to spend a few minutes talking about how, you know, rest of the earlier stuff that I talked about at a very high level, how that does translate into our product portfolio today. So starting from the bottom up, and you know, for those of you who are familiar with the Red Hat product suite, it could just be an overkill for you, but I think most of you are familiar with the Red Hat Enterprise Linux platform, but I want to share some of the other things. The first is RHEL OSP, the Red Hat Enterprise Linux OpenStack platform, which is Red Hat's OpenStack implementation. And I think everyone should be familiar with what OpenStack is, and especially with, you know, the intersection with things like Ambari and Sahara and all those kinds of new projects. This is very critical, the tie-in between the infrastructure as a service layer and Hadoop in this case. The other is Red Hat Storage. So 3 years ago, we acquired a company called Gluster, which provides distributed scale-out file system. And 4 months ago or 5 months ago, we acquired Inktank, the company behind Ceph. So with the combination of Gluster and the Ceph projects, now Red Hat has the ability to provide a full spectrum of file, object, and block scale-out across your infrastructure, whether it's physical, virtual, or cloud, right? The other, if you go up top a little bit and look at our middleware product portfolio, it's the 35 products in the product portfolio, so I could spend 2 days talking about each one. But the thing to keep in mind is what I've highlighted here is the data virtualization platform, which essentially allows you to get data from multiple sources and then have them integrated in one single place, right? One of the things that we've done, and I believe, Greg, is it on our public website, our reference architecture around JDV and storage for the financial services side of things? Yeah. Okay, so we do have, you know, one of the things that customers keep asking us for over and over again is all these technologies, all these products are great, but give us some proof points, give us some reference architectures and how we can tie it all together. So we do have on our website, and for those of you who are interested, you know, after the thing, Greg can give you the information, but a very, what I would call a complete reference architecture on how you can start to deploy Hadoop with the Red Hat product portfolio. And a couple of areas, I think one is around financial services, the other is around fraud management or fraud detection. So real meaningful workloads and meaningful business outcomes on how we can help, not just with our solutions, but with our with our partner solutions. Sorry. All right, so this is the right, yeah. I think I mentioned this earlier today, right, which is a few minutes ago, which is that one way to look at this is what's the product portfolio look like. The other dimension to view this as is every one of our product portfolio, all the way from the operating system to middleware to infrastructure as a service and a platform as a service. Before I go there, how many of you are familiar with our OpenShift, the platform as a service solution? Cool. So again, both yesterday as part of our Cloudera announcement as well as the Hortonworks announcement that we did, there's a lot of integration between our those vendors' offerings and our platform as a service offering. Some of them is available today, but we continue to work with them to create. So the whole notion behind the OpenShift product is essentially a platform as a service, but we have the notion of cartridges, so you could actually tie in a bunch of cartridges to create your entire application as one single entity, if you will. And this is where we have, I don't have the list of current cartridges that we have, but this is an example of how we work with partners around our ecosystem to broaden the appeal of OpenShift. So I think I covered the community aspect and the product aspect, but let me just take a few minutes and talk about the ecosystem piece, because as this title says, the innovation doesn't happen at Red Hat, it doesn't happen at one single place, whether it's Hortonworks or Cloudera or wherever. I think it happens at the ecosystem level, at a community level. And a couple of things I want to highlight here, and I think I have some slides that go into a couple of these things specifically, but SAP is a classic example. I know it doesn't fit into this Hadoop type of thing, but with the HANA product, what we've done there with Red Hat Enterprise Linux is fine-tune the operating system to support the HANA environment the best possible way. Here again, we have reference architectures that talk about how the two work together. Wow. Alrighty. So, Greg or Steve, do you guys want to talk a little bit about the Hortonworks side of things, or you want me to keep going? Either way.
Okay. Should use this, right?
Does it work?
I think they're going to turn it on. Okay. So we work with actually both Hortonworks and Cloudera at multiple levels, starting at the top with our JBoss middleware portfolio. So that's really targeted at application developers and people who need to integrate data together from multiple sources, including Hadoop. So we have a specific example that would be JBoss Data Virtualization, which virtualizes data that allow you to combining data from Hadoop and non-Hadoop sources and put it together into a single data model. So very useful for lots of people here at the conference who want to combine data from different places. We also have other tools in the JBoss suite. Ranga mentioned OpenShift earlier, which is platform as a service, so we have integration with that as well with Hortonworks. And then we have a direct in the middle, in the platform space, we have a direct tie-in for Red Hat storage that allows you to plug that directly into Hortonworks data platform and basically save your data directly into Red Hat storage, but access it through HDFS interfaces and APIs. And then at the bottom, we obviously have our RHEL business with Hortonworks running on RHEL, and we have a reference architecture for that, as well as the OpenStack. We're working very closely with Hortonworks as well as Cloudera on Sahara, which is the framework for doing elastic MapReduce on top of OpenStack, which is like a private cloud.
Do you want to add? Yeah, please. Good. So if we just go back, can we go back one step? There you go. Okay. So, at this conference, there's lots of vendors out there which are, sort of Hadoop washing their products. One of the things I want to talk about is legitimacy and sort of how we went about engineering this. So Hadoop has a pluggable file system architecture. So we actually went in ahead and wrote a Hadoop file system plugin for Red Hat storage. And as part of that, we actually opened up the whole Hadoop ecosystem by providing a test library that any additional alternative Hadoop file system vendor could write their own file system implementation and test that with. So we did that. And then also in Ambari, actually the first side, that just sort of solves the runtime complexity, but there's also the deployment and management complexity, which is in Ambari, right, which is the Apache-based management tool. And so we went in and did the same thing in Ambari and sort of unwired it from HDFS to support alternative Hadoop file systems. And so as that, we have a variant of the Hortonworks stack, which is the Hortonworks computational layer on top of the Red Hat storage layer, and we're actually the #2 committer in Apache Ambari. So I just wanted to add those points.
Want to go to the next one?
Sure. Yeah. So I think I'll start with the Cloudera side. So I worked on that quite recently. The way I'd look at this is you've got platform complexity and application complexity. And the application complexity is how long does it take your developers to be productive to actually write an application that runs on the joint Cloudera Red Hat platform. And so that's what we're tackling with JBoss and OpenShift. And so what we're doing there is integrating OpenShift with the Cloudera Enterprise platform, and so that you can basically spin up cartridges and write Hadoop-based applications. So an example that you should be seeing fairly soon is how to write a typical 3-tier web application, but instead of serving the data from MySQL, it actually serves it from HBase using the Cloudera Kite libraries, right? So a pretty common usage of HBase. And then we're jointly working on Cloudera Impala. So Impala is Cloudera's platform for ad hoc iterative analytics, SQL-based, obviously. And so with Impala, it's sort of hardwired for HDFS. So we're doing sort of the same thing where we're unwiring it and getting it working with anything that supports the Hadoop file system API. And then on the OpenStack side and the RHEL side, I'll start with RHEL in that we're working to put together an architecture blueprint for running Cloudera Enterprise on RHEL using OpenJDK. Oracle JDK has long been the sort of the JDK du jour that the Hadoop community has used, and so this is actually sort of a notable departure from that, where we're actually validating that OpenJDK works in a wide set of different environments or use cases. And I should also add that we've done a ton of work in the Apache BigTop community to actually build out a broad set of ecosystem tests to do those kinds of validations. And then on OpenStack, as Ranga alluded to earlier, we had the Sahara, and OpenStack is pretty complex, right? So, and Hadoop is pretty complex, and if you go to somebody that's new to Hadoop and new to OpenStack and say, get Hadoop running on OpenStack, they tend to pull out a lot of hair, right? So what Sahara does is provides an automated way to deploy Hadoop on OpenStack. And so we have an existing plugin for Hortonworks, which basically allows you to automatically deploy the Hortonworks distribution on our RHEL OpenStack platform. So our OpenStack distribution, just automates that and has a dashboard where you're able to basically submit jobs the same way you do with Amazon EMR. And then we're also working with Cloudera and you should see a CDH version of that coming fairly shortly as well. And so I think at that point I'll turn over to Greg if you have anything else to add on this slide.
So I guess a couple of other points. I talked about the JBoss data virtualization on the previous slide with Hortonworks. We're doing the same thing with Cloudera. And we'll have a Hive connector as well as an Impala connector to allow customers to abstract data out of Cloudera Enterprise and combine it with other data sources like data warehouses, BI tools, databases. And then also we're working around security with Navigator, with Cloudera Navigator. We're going to do some cooperation around that and Red Hat Enterprise Linux and a lot of the security tools that are in RHEL. And then finally, actually, you cover the director. CloudForms is also, we're going to cooperate around moving workloads between clouds in an open hybrid cloud environment. I think that's, oh, and then at the bottom, we're just going to have a lot of joint marketing, joint selling with Cloudera, as well as coordinated support. So when customers have tickets, we can open tickets with the other companies when we need to solve the customer's problem.
This is going to give you an insight into how Red Hat works, collaboration, but more importantly, put your colleagues on the spot. You know, that's the yeah. All right. So the reason I bring this slide up is, you know, when we talk about unstructured data, right? Today in environments, the biggest generator of unstructured data is log files, right? So one of the things that we've done, this is a fairly new thing over the last 30 days, is integrating with Splunk, so that if you have, you know, large amounts of data, obviously with Splunk, one of the neat things with Splunk is it allows you to segregate your data based on whether it's hot, warm, cold, or frozen. And in conjunction with the Red Hat storage solution, now you can have the ability to fit in the Red Hat storage as part of the way to manage your cold storage. So a simple use case of that is, one of the things that we've done is worked with Cisco around cybersecurity analytics. So now you can analyze a lot more data for threat detection and those type of things, for patterns that are emerging. So the more data you have to analyze and manage, the better your ability to detect any of these cybersecurity threats. And so this is, I know it's not directly related to the Hadoop side of things, but today when we look at organizations today, search and machine data is one of the biggest sources of unstructured data that they're looking to manage effectively. So I thought I'd just put in a quick word for that. So I know we have like less than 10 minutes here, but there's things that I wanted to highlight out of this today. We have I know it's almost, show's over, right? So I don't think there's a demo. There's not a space for it, but we have demos over there, as well as these three guys here in Irsha that are experts in what we've talked about here so far. But if there's takeaway from this is, I think from our viewpoint, we will absolutely continue to work on different big data communities. I think Steve touched up on a couple, not just on the Hadoop side, but also on Ambari and everything else. So Sahara and other communities that are very, I'd say, relevant to the Hadoop side of things. The other part is from a product side of things. I think what we'll do is continue to get solutions out there that work really well with some of the leading big data practitioners and big data vendors, right? So those are the two things that the ecosystem play and the community play, juxtaposed by the product portfolio that we have, is the way that you can really think about the Red Hat, how Red Hat thinks about big data. Right? And so I want to kind of open it up for questions. I think we have some time here, so if anybody, I try to keep it under 30 minutes, which I did, but if anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer it, or at least have my colleagues here answer those questions.
Right there.
Yes, cookies too.
Yes. Candy and hats.
Come on, Tom. There you go.
I think you only get a half for a good one.
Coming from employee number 7 at Sun, no, that's a tough question. Come on. Anything else? Yes, sir.
So I have a question. So you mentioned Splunk. I was talking to them earlier. When it comes to working together with Splunk and ThreatCon, what exactly does that entail? For, let's say, for a solution, or because obviously you go with Splunk, get the solution, and basically deploy it on top of the Linux environment.
Yeah.
Now, what do you mean exactly by that partnership and working together with Splunk?
So I think of much like and I'll let Greg also get into the details here, but this is not, it's not a replacement for Splunk. It's basically allowing Red Hat storage to be the container of the Splunk data, right? And in a Splunk's life cycle, where it's all latency and performance in one level at the end of the spectrum, and the other end of the spectrum, it's frozen data that never gets read. I think what we do is enable customers to get the right solutions at right part of the life cycle, right? So if somebody were to say, go back and then say, I really want hot data, which is, latency is something and performance is something all SSD based, that's, customers will have their own solutions for that, but where they want to move some of the data from, hot to warm, and then that's where the Red Hat storage solution fits in. So think of it as an ISV partner for Splunk, or Splunk being an ISV partner for us. So Greg, did I answer that correctly? Yeah. Cool. Data, you mean the data virtualization, or at the hypervisor? Sorry. Yeah, that's the JDV and the Hive connector. So you want to talk a little bit about that? Or? Yeah, go ahead. Go on, don't fight over it.
So I'm not sure. So the question was, how does it work? Yeah. Okay. So what tools are provided from Red Hat to do data virtualization? Okay. So the core of it is JBoss data virtualization. So what that does is it's got connectors down into lots of data sources. And when I say lots, obviously Hadoop. So we go through Hive or Impala in the Cloudera example to get access to that data. We also have connectors for everything you can imagine: SQL Server, Oracle databases, mainframes, BI tools, SaaS, etc. Right? We have connectors for a lot of things, and so all those connectors basically either pull the data up. You can physically pull it out of there and put it in a common data store, which Red Hat Storage would be good at, or you can leave the data there and just basically pull up a common link. And then what JBoss Data Virtualization does is it creates one data model that you can access one way. So you can now take data from Hadoop and SQL Server and Oracle and a mainframe and have a single data model and write analytics using a single ODBC, JDBC interface to run analytics across data that's sitting in lots of different places. But it gives you that one place and one interface to do your analytics too, so you don't have to worry about all the details of where the data is coming from. Does that make sense? Okay.
To piggyback on that, I was seeing Drill, basically being able to tap into multiple data sources. What tools now can I use to consume, basically take advantage of pulling data from Hadoop, maybe CSV files or relational database, logs, etc.
Right.
Could I use something like Arc? Could I use something like Tableau? What tools would be able to basically tap into that data aspect? Pulling from multiple sources.
Yeah. You want to?
So I think he's asking what.
On the top, the analytics or yeah.
Yeah, so I think you're asking specifically for, the data virtualization creates a layer of consolidation, sort of like master data management, right? Consolidate all your data across, and it gives you a single layer for read-write to it. I think you're asking about what analytical queries can you run on that layer. Is that right? Do you know, Greg? I'm not a JBoss data virtualization expert, but
basically you can run any analytics. You can't. So R would work, Python would work. Anything that has an ODBC, JDBC, or RESTful interface that can use that as its data interface.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Could I ask a question? Is anybody doing any Python analytics here? You're doing Python analytics, all right? And then how do you feel about HDFS and getting data in and out of it? Yeah. So one of the reasons, one of the other things I want to bring this up is, if you look at if you have a scale-out storage substrate or a distributed file system, one of the nice advantages of Red Hat Storage is that because of the Hadoop file system plugin, it offers a Hadoop file system interface, which basically means the whole Hadoop ecosystem can read and write data and access it, whatever you're using, Apache drill, whatever, right? But it also has a POSIX interface. So, from the other side, you have your whole Python ecosystem can, whether you're using NumPy or Panda or whatever, right, can access the data in that, right? So it actually works really well as a central analytics repository for multiple different teams. I think one of the really interesting things about Strata is you get these two communities together, right? You get the Python data science community and the Hadoop applications and platform community, and they're not the same people, right? Very different use cases, right? And so I think that's really what's interesting about Red Hat Storage is it's actually one platform that both communities can use. Just a point I wanted to make. Right.
So, like, do you have any plans on supporting virtualizations on different platforms, such a way that we do VMware and all that, like Docker and all that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yes, I believe.
OpenShift 3.0 is Docker-based.
Yes, OpenShift 3.0, which is the next rev, we've already announced that it's going to have Docker supported, Docker-based. RHEL 7, right, we just released 6 months ago, has atomic containers as well as is it the C groups, right? And I think, and even Docker, right? So we do have the ingredients for containerization, if you will, yeah. And we are looking at things like in the upstream community, there's already a container or a Dockerized version of Red Hat Storage or the cluster bits. So every part of the stack, right, this new wave of containerization, we think has an impact on every part of the stack. So we're already starting to, the RHEL operating system was the first, but you'll see more and more of it as we go up the stack. All right? Great, thank you. Thanks, folks.